They say some moments in life can break a man, but this was not just a moment. It was the crumbling of an empire, the death of everything Bill Cosby thought he could control. A collapse so loud, it echoed far beyond the walls of a courtroom and shook the very foundations of Hollywood's illusions. For the courtroom that day was suffocating, the air thick enough to choke on, breaths trembling like leaves in a storm, cameras clicking like the sound of 1,000 hammers hitting nails into the coffin of his legacy. And when the judge's voice finally cut through that atmosphere like a blade of steel slicing through silence, declaring life in prison without the possibility of parole, the room froze. Even the air seemed to pause in disbelief, and Cosby tried to steady himself, but his body betrayed him. His lips quivered uncontrollably, his chest rose in frantic, shallow gasps, and the blood drained from his face until it looked like marble carved from stone. And then, as if the weight of his sins crushed him all at once, his body collapsed, a thud echoing across the room as gasps erupted from the gallery. Lawyers and security rushing forward, some whispering, "Is he gone?" Others staring wide-eyed, unable to process what they had just seen, and outside protesters caught wind of the news. Some cheered and screamed justice at last. Others murmured darkly, "This is the beginning of the end." But then came the real shockwave. Whispers rippling from the prosecution's side that his collapse was not just from the verdict, but from something far more dangerous. For moments before, sealed files had been mentioned in court, files said to contain names of other Hollywood titans, names that could stain reputations forever, along with a secret recording of Cosby confessing truths that could shatter careers, destroy families, and rewrite the story of power in Hollywood. And across the aisle, Pamela Warner, mother of Malcolm Jamal Warner, sat in eerie stillness, tears streaming hot down her face, her voice trembling as she whispered, "This is just the beginning." Words that carried like prophecy into a storm about to break, and outside the hashtag spread like wildfire. Would Cosby collapse? Would truthsef? Hollywood secrets. Millions glued to their screens, watching the footage of Cosby hitting the floor on loop. Their hearts pounding with that gnawing sense that the verdict was not the end, but only the first crack before the earthquake. For the day had begun like any other in the crowded courthouse, reporters lined up since dawn waiting for history to unfold, protesters filling the streets with signs of justice, truth, and never again. Some waiting years for this day, others just to witness the fall of a giant. And inside the tension clung like static electricity, sharp, buzzing, dangerous. Every seat taken, the scent of old wood, stale coffee, and human anxiety thick in the air. And Cosby sat at the defense table in his perfectly pressed suit, his hands folded neatly, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with denial as if clinging to a rope fraying at the edges, a rope about to snap. And when the judge entered, the energy shifted like a current, conversations dying mid-sentence, the shuffle of papers halted, and all that remained was the slow echo of the judge's footsteps counting down to the irreversible. And when the words "life in prison without parole" detonated across the room, the gasp that followed was like a tidal wave. One juror covering their mouth, a reporter dropping their pen with a faint clink, a whisper from the back row, "Oh my God!" And Cosby flinched as though struck by the sentence physically, his lips moving with no sound, his eyes glossing over, his shoulders trembling until the dam broke, his face drained of color, his breathing frantic, one hand clutching the table, the other his chest, and then his body gave out with a sickening slump. The thud of his fall reverberating like a final punctuation mark, chaos erupting instantly, voices shouting "Call 911," medics rushing forward, cameras flashing, capturing the image of America's fallen TV father sprawled on the courtroom floor, his suit wrinkled, mouth open, a photo that would dominate every news cycle by the hour. Outside, the crowd roared with divided voices, half cheering in triumph, half murmuring uneasily at the sight of an old man stripped of dignity. But what no one outside knew yet was that the collapse had not come from the verdict alone, but from the weight of those sealed files whispered about by the prosecution. Files said to contain more victims, but most explosively, names. Names of powerful actors, producers, and executives still at the top. Men and women whose careers rested on moral facades, and an audio recording of Cosby himself, laughing, boasting, admitting to things so vile it could dismantle the entire illusion of Hollywood's authority. And perhaps it was the realization that the files could one day be unsealed, that the names could be spoken aloud, that finally shatter. By the third day after Bill Cosby's collapse, the world was no longer simply watching the trial of a disgraced comedian. It was witnessing the unraveling of an empire that had hidden behind cameras, contracts, and carefully scripted illusions for decades, and the whispers of the sealed files had grown into a roar. An anonymous account on the dark web posting what it claimed to be a heavily redacted version of the list. Blurred names, but with enough context for internet sleuths to begin piecing together the identities of powerful actors, beloved talk show hosts, and even a sitting studio executive. And as speculation ignited like wildfire, the second audio leak surfaced, longer, clearer, and far more devastating than the first. Cosby's voice deliberate, almost smug, as he spoke about decades of protection, about pulling strings in the press, about having friends in places so powerful that while his hands got dirty, theirs remained spotless, and the chilling casualness with which he described silencing victims, laughing about stories buried and careers protected, sent shockwaves through the globe, igniting talk shows, podcasts, newsrooms, and households in furious debates about how much had been hidden and how deep the rot ran, and hashtags multiplied into an uncontainable flood. Juror Cosby files, juror Hollywood fallout, juror no one is safe, as the DA's office quietly drafted subpoenas and prepared warrants, and outside survivors gathered in growing numbers, candles flickering in their hands, their silence louder than the chants of protesters, a haunting reminder that behind every headline was a life altered forever. And Pamela Warner stood with them, not holding signs or giving speeches, but as a steady pillar of presence, her grief a living testimony. Her son Malcolm Jamal Warner, once a boy molded into the smiling illusion of Cosby's sitcom family, now a man forced to live under the shadow of that legacy. And as the world replayed Cosby's collapse on loop, Pamela's face became the other side of the symbol. The righteous fury of a mother betrayed by an industry that had stolen innocence under the guise of entertainment, and panic spread inside Hollywood like a virus, executives convening emergency meetings, PR teams drafting vague statements of support for victims while frantically scrubbing old contracts, NDAs being bought out quietly in the hope of preempting exposure, and a streaming platform abruptly pulling reruns of The Cosby Show, along with several other classics linked to those rumored on the list, citing licensing disputes but fooling no one. And then came the arrests, shocking and sudden, federal agents raiding a Beverly Hills mansion late at night, dragging a powerful producer out in handcuffs as neighbors filmed from their phones, the footage viral within minutes, and by dawn, 2 more industry veterans had been taken into custody, their decades-long careers collapsing in hours. And the media framed it not as isolated arrests, but as the beginning of a purge, an overdue reckoning that Hollywood could not stop. And yet the files remained sealed, the full truth still locked away, a truth Pamela Warner and others now demanded to be released, launching a pressure campaign that gathered millions of signatures worldwide, petitions plastered across every platform. Chuck's unseal, the files joining the trending charts, her fiery words at a rally echoing everywhere. If they've protected each other for decades, then it's time we protect the truth. And those words became a chant, a movement, a mantra for survivors and their allies. But with the momentum came danger. Anonymous threats filling activists' inboxes. Pamela's own car vandalized with the single word, "Stop," carved into the paint. Yet instead of silencing her, it emboldened her resolve, and she declared publicly, "They're scared, and scared people make mistakes," and mistakes soon emerged. An entertainment lawyer accidentally leaking an internal email thread where studio executives discussed strategies to contain the situation, admitting they had to sacrifice a few names to protect the rest. The emails splashed across front pages worldwide, proof of a coordinated cover-up that infuriated the public and confirmed what survivors had known all along, and the outrage grew absolute. Lawmakers calling for congressional hearings, brands severing multi-million-dollar deals with stars linked to the whispers, charities distancing themselves from household names. The Cosby collapse no longer just the end of a man's career, but the beginning of a cultural earthquake, reshaping every corner of the industry. And still, the files remained sealed. But then came the final blow. A leaked recording from inside a closed-door court session where a judge could be heard saying, "Once the motion passes, everything becomes public record. We can't protect them forever." The grainy audio enough to trigger panic across Hollywood. The clock ticking audibly for those whose names might soon be exposed. And families across the